When we have a loved one who suffers from Alzheimer's, they may not look any different to us on the outside, but we and everything around us may look very different to them. Alzheimer's affects the perception of reality. In fact, it creates in a person's mind an entirely different reality. So it's understandable that it affects behavior too. My mom used to rage against my dad. She thought that he was trying to hurt her, when in effect he was trying to gently care for her. That kind of paranoia sometimes accompanies this disease, but the pain in his eyes was really, really hurtful. A person with Alzheimer's, for example, may see a comb and think it's a fork. Or because he's living in a reality of 40 years ago, a man may perceive his daughter as his long-dead wife. These are both common misperceptions, and as you can imagine, this confusion can have a direct effect on a person's behavior. These behaviors can be among the most difficult challenges if you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's. We have to try to understand both our loved one's altered reality and their physical surroundings and address what we think might be causing the behavior.
Then when I realized that she has such an insecurity about material things due to the disease, I start copy the bank statement and put in every single room in the house. So wherever she is, every time she asks, say, your father stole my money, then I will say, no, he didn't, and here's the bank statement. Look, you still have this much in your bank. And then she's happy.
My mother was always a very kind of meek person, very soft-spoken, she had a great sense of humor, but she wasn't really what I would call an extrovert. She was incredibly compassionate, and she would start cursing. Now, she had never cursed in her entire life, but if I did things such as trying to give her a shower, she would, and she was a small person, we're all kind of small in the family, but her strength amazed me. She would fight me.
It has begun to progress where she was combative in anything that was new, any situation that came up that was a little different. And it was frustrating for us, it still is, because you could try to warn her that we're getting ready to go to the doctor or we're getting ready to go to, but she would forget by the time you got there. And she would be angry at you because she would say, you didn't tell me. And so you felt like you couldn't win.
Well, the research shows that in about 2/3 of all people who have dementia have some kind of behavioral symptom. It might be wandering, it might be what we call hoarding, rummaging, disrobing in public, inappropriate sexual behavior, inappropriate social behavior. But what research has showed in about 90%, 97% of those cases, that if we find the reason behind that behavior, if we change our approach, change the physical environment, we can reduce it.
Every one of us are unique, and an Alzheimer's person is going to have a good day and a bad day. They might have a good hour and a bad hour, and as a result, in some of those bad hours or bad days or bad times, there may be some behavior management problems. They may get very irritated, irascible, tense, angry, frustrated. All of those are very normal kinds of reactions to a situation that people are unhappy with. So those are certainly things that we want to stress that to caregivers and to people that are around with someone with the disease, that's normal, that's part of the disease, and it's a disease process. It's not something that the person is doing on purpose. They're not being angry or they're not being ornery just for the sake of being ornery.
What happens is when certain parts of the brain that control, that inhibit the normal or typical impulses that one might have as a child or as an adolescent, those types of inhibitions become affected by the disease, and as a result they become disinhibited. They lack the normal inhibitions, and so they have a lot of difficulty with control of impulses, and they may behave inappropriately as a result of that.
What are you doing? What are you doing? Looking in the mirror. I know it's me. Yeah. It's me.
Plus, they have lack of insight into what they're doing, so that whereas an adolescent, for example, may not be able to control their impulses, but is aware that they shouldn't be doing something, these patients are not only unable to control their impulses, but they also lack the insight that what they're doing is inappropriate. And therefore, they may continue to persist in that type of behavior. And this can be very, very troublesome. And we certainly have ways of trying to control that kind of behavior with medications and with redirecting people, and basically avoidance, trying to change the environment such that they're not put into that situation.
A behavior problem implies that if you have a problem, we have to do something to correct it. So first of all, change our thinking that it's a behavior symptom. That if there's something in the way a person's acting that's not good for them, it's harming them, it's harming others, it's getting in the way of them functioning, it's getting in the way of this person with dementia being happy, it's getting in the way of them being safe, they have a symptom. So what do you want to do when you find out there's a symptom? You don't want to stop the symptom, you want to stop the cause of the symptom. So the most important thing is we stop trying to look at stopping the wandering, or let's stop the urinating in that corner. What we want to do is find out, why is he urinating in that corner? What can we do to get him to urinate in the appropriate place? Why does he keep trying to go home? What is it about this place that doesn't feel like home?
She got to the point where, which is also kind of common, where she didn't recognize herself in the mirror. And I didn't know what was happening. Because I would hear from another room, I would hear her yelling and saying things like, "Get out of my house," and yelling. And I think it wasn't until I discussed that with her physician that he told me what was going on. So we went through and we covered all the mirrors in the house.
Some people will say there's what they call the ABCs of behavior management. With each behavior or symptom that the family sees, you think in terms of the antecedent, what came before the behavior, what was going on, what were the circumstances, what time of day was it, what had just happened, anything that might contribute to why this behavior happened. And then there's the behavior itself. What meaning does that behavior have, if any, if you can figure it out? And then the C is the consequence, how we react to that behavior. So if with any behavior, such as agitation, you think, what was going on right before this? What may have caused this? What may have led to this? That may not help you with that moment in time, but it may help you prevent it in the future or avoid it in the future.
The behaviors that tend to cause the most difficulty for families are when people get suspicious. And they're very likely to get suspicious because they don't understand the timing of events. And they don't remember putting something away. It's gone, they can't see it, and therefore the person standing there must have stolen it. The person standing there may be their family member. And those kinds of accusations from a long-term loved spouse can be very difficult for the family to handle. One of the things most families learn is confronting it, providing rational explanations of where the disappeared item is, doesn't work. Telling the patient that they lost it also doesn't work. It just makes them mad, you know. So most families learn sort of the hard way that you have to deal with suspicious behavior by saying, "Oh, I'm sorry it's lost, I'll help you look for it." It's not acknowledging that you stole it. It's saying you're having trouble and I know you're upset about it and I'll find a way to make it right.
Say, Alan, are you gone to bed? You know, come and get ready for bed. And I had the pajamas there, and he said, what? You know, and he was very resistant. And this was early on, you know, before I got a little smarter. And I was saying, put your pajamas on. So he finally put the pajamas on, and he looked at me, you know, like with sort of disdain, and he said, "Is this what you wanted?" And I said, "Yes, now you're ready for bed." He said, "Is this written somewhere?" And that made me realize it isn't written anywhere. And why am I agonizing over this? And what difference does it make? What he sleeps in. And it makes you understand, it makes you change your values of what's important and what's not important, so that you don't agonize, even if they do things differently. You know, where is it written? And how much does it matter?
She wandered off one evening while I had her, and I heard the bathwater running, and I had been distracted by a phone call, and I yelled, "Bee Mama, where are you?" And she screamed, "I'm in here." And by the time I had gotten to the bathroom, she was in the tub with the water running. She had her skirt, her shoes, her socks, her hat, her fully dressed. And naturally, like anyone, I said, "What are you doing?" And she just politely said, "I'm soaking my tail." And naturally, I said, "Oh no, but we've got to get you out of here." And then I stepped back and said, "No, that's perfectly fine. Let's just soak as long as you want." So I put the commode top down, and we had the best time. And as I think back on that, that was a fond memory.
Walk away for 5 minutes. And if the situation gets a little bit tense, if you can walk away and stay away 5 or 10 minutes or even less sometimes, and then they will have forgotten.
Everything is individual. Everything is based upon the individual person and looking at certain factors. If this individual is being hostile, being verbally aggressive, being resistant, wandering off, whatever the behavior is, the first one is, have we created within the person who has dementia a feeling of being in control of what's going on? If we're removing control from them, if we're using the should, shouldn't, must, nots, then we may be setting that up, that behavioral response up. The next one is perception. Is there too much going on right now around us as I'm asking him to take his medication? Is the phone ringing? Is there somebody else in the living room talking? Is the TV on? What can I do to reduce this overstimulation? Or is it too boring? There's nothing to do. And they have to create their own stimulation by taking their clothes off. Because I know if I take my clothes off, you're going to come in and at least talk to me. You're going to make some noise about me doing something inappropriate.
The other basic changes in behavior that tend to upset families is that people lose their frustration tolerance. So they become impulsive sometimes. They may act irrationally, and they may fill in blanks in their memory by concocting stories that make sense to them, like the family stole it, or my wife is having an affair because I can't find her, so she must be out having an affair. And families have to learn to respond calmly to that, not to get into rational arguments, to use a lot of reassurance, a lot of distraction, a lot of cueing, reminding people where things are by labeling things in the house to help them find it. But mostly a lot of reassuring. That seems to work better than anything. What a lot of these behavioral symptoms are about is fear. The world no longer makes sense to this person. They're scared that they're going to be abandoned in a place that doesn't make sense. So what they want is to be reassured that everything is in order and that everything is going according to plan.
I think that's the main point that caregivers have to come to realize, that much of the conduct that becomes a part of their lives is not deliberate. And I think you have to really work on keeping that foremost in your mind, that this is not something that, if this disease was not present, that this person would do to help you accept it better.
A family caregiver is taking care of an individual day in and day out. They may see some of these behaviors suddenly worsen. They were doing pretty well, and now they're getting agitated every day, or they're sundowning more, they're more incontinent, or they're not sleeping as well. That may be a sign that there's a medical problem going on. And the family member needs to be very attuned to changes in patterns. It may just be the disease process, but if it continues, it warrants an evaluation, because it may be a bladder infection or a pneumonia or something that is causing a worsening of that symptom.
The next thing that might be contributing to a behavioral symptom is the feeling of pain, there could be truly physical discomfort happening. If you're trying to give me a bath and I'm fighting you, is it because I'm too cold? Is it because the water is too hot? If I need to go to the bathroom, am I constipated and I can't express that to you? If I'm grouchy and not a very nice person, could it be I've been walking all day and I have a sore on the bottom of my feet? Is there anything that's causing me discomfort or physical pain in any way? One of the first signs of pain and discomfort in a person with dementia is a behavior symptom, some sort of agitation, some sort of pushing away, trying to express that they're just not feeling well. And the next part is looking at, is there anything around here that this could be frightening or creating a sense of panic or vulnerability in the person I'm taking care of?
For caregivers, one of the most disturbing and unexpected behaviors related to Alzheimer's is combativeness. Most of us are just not prepared for the idea that our loved one could physically strike out at us. But as with many Alzheimer's-related behaviors, there may be a physical cause behind the emotional outbursts. It may be fatigue or a need for more exercise or other diversions. Fortunately, though, addressing the cause can help ease the behavioral symptoms.
Combativeness is often just it's what we call a catastrophic reaction, when a person's level of agitation is so great that they just strike out. Again, we have to go back to the personality of that individual. Maybe this person was always a very aggressive kind of person, and this is how they now kind of have an over-exaggeration of some of those activities or behaviors they once had.
We've had some real problems with her getting frustrated and angry and pounding her fists on her head, and we have given her a mild tranquilizer, which has helped that. And I was very reluctant to do that. I felt very guilty about it in the beginning because I felt like it was something I was really doing for myself. But after we did it, we realized it's for her benefit too. She was not happy, she was angry, she was frustrated, and it just calmed her down a little bit.
Striking out or attempting to cause harm is never appropriate, and caregivers have been injured because of this. Appropriate strategies are to try to avoid situations that might provoke such a behavior.
Fatigue is a major cause of aggressive outbursts. We're only beginning to understand that people with Alzheimer's get exhausted from keeping it all straight. And they need more breaks, they need more downtime and rest periods. They're often not bored. Families may think they're bored because it looks like they're doing nothing. But some people with Alzheimer's really needs a lot more timeouts to stare out the window, rock in the rocking chair, look at a book without really reading it, listen to music, something that calms them down. Walking and exercise also works very well. There's reason to believe that regular exercise in a routine, particularly walking, increases people's attention span, decreases their anxiety, works off some of that restlessness that's very characteristic of the disease. And just as a lifestyle habit, it encourages continued functioning and mobility, which becomes very important throughout the course of the illness.
If you approach them and they're striking out and being combative, you generally want to back off. You want to talk very softly to them. You may want to leave them alone for a few minutes and come back and try whatever activity you're trying the second time. For example, I heard of a gentleman, they were trying to get him up out of bed. He was in an assisted living facility. They wanted to get him up in the morning so he would go eat breakfast. And he would lie in bed with the covers up, and if you tried to pull the covers down and force him to get up, he would strike out, and had actually been very combative at times. So they learned to really kind of tempt him with a cup of coffee that he could smell, a little bite of bacon that he could taste and smell, and just talking to him about getting up and moving. If he started getting ready to lash out, they would back off and just kind of start the process again. So it takes a lot of patience and some sense of humor, I think, to do that. But avoiding the combativeness is really what you're striving for.
Some people find that distraction in aggressive behavior works very well. One woman, her husband, in the middle of the night, got up and came at her with a carving knife and said, "I have to kill you." And he'd never been aggressive in his life. And she very wisely, spur of the moment, responded and said, "Oh, okay, but wouldn't you like some ice cream first?" And he just followed her into the kitchen, took the bowl of ice cream and couldn't hold both of them at the same time, and put down the knife, and she was able to put it away. She then learned that she had to lock up things like that to keep them from being accessible.
We've already seen how Alzheimer's attack on the brain changes a person's perception of reality. Well, sometimes that perception can be altered so severely that our loved one suffers from hallucinations. For example, seeing and talking to people who aren't really there. While medications may be appropriate to help reduce the hallucinations, more often we simply have to rely on creative coping strategies.
Did you feed that little girl? Yeah. Did you feed that little girl?
Yes, we fed her.
Who did? You?
Yes, she did.
No, Ava didn't. Ava didn't. Who did?
I don't know.
Well, you don't know they did. She may starve to death. Well, you better be careful about that.
Okay.
She's your responsibility.
Realize that the brain cells are dying in a person with Alzheimer's disease, and control of normal awareness of understanding is lacking there. So images, thoughts, memories can produce hallucinations, which can be frightening and painful to the individual.
Sometimes people with Alzheimer's disease or other kinds of dementia will hallucinate. They'll think that they're seeing things that they're not seeing. So, for example, if they have the television set on, they may think that the people that are in the television show are actually talking to them in the room. It's looking at those kinds of environmental cues, because in that case you can certainly turn off the television, turn off the radio. So it's very important that you kind of put yourself into the environment and then look at what you think might be causing the behavior that's a problem.
And there's certain medications called atypical antipsychotic medications that you would use to help decrease the amount of hallucinations someone would have. But you want to first find out why they have it. You just don't want to give them the medicine.
Hallucinations can be either visual, things that the patient sees that are not real, or auditory, things that they hear. Sometimes these are not bothersome things. As long as the hallucination is not something that's causing them fear or distress, it's probably better to go along with it and not challenge the hallucination. If it's something that's causing them distress, then this may be an instance where a medication to treat that hallucination would be appropriate. For example, a lot of times they will see relatives that have already passed away. If you are continually telling them that, no, Dad's not here, he died 10 years ago, that could be very distressing. Whereas you just say, oh, well, that's nice, tell them hello for me, it may not be bothersome to them at all. But if it's causing them a lot of distress, then probably that's when you need to seek medical help, because there are medications that will help with those problems.
People with this disease can be very busy, and a lot of them really get around. My mother, at a party one night, we couldn't find her, black tie affair, and we're looking around. Well, she had wandered outside, was way out in the parking lot, and when we finally caught up with her, she was out there taking her dress off. And I said, Mom, what are you doing? And she said, I'm ready to go home. I'm putting my pajamas on. We can laugh about it now, but it's scary. Wandering is one of the most common behaviors in people with Alzheimer's. And for obvious reasons, it is potentially one of the most dangerous. It demands both vigilance and a real effort to make your environment secure, and it can be very draining for you.
He left, and it got dark, and I couldn't go out because I had the baby. My neighbor got in her car and started driving around. Before it was over, there were about 6 cars from the block circling around looking for him. They didn't find him. We made a call the police finally and made a report. And this happened. He went out about 5 o'clock, and about a little before 12, we got a call. He was at an L stop, and I guess they realized he didn't know where he was going, and they called because of the bracelet.
The transportation at the day program would drive her back home. We had a key pinned to her clothes. The driver would unlock the door, and it would still be a couple of hours before either one of us would get home. I get home one night and from work, and she's not there. And Joe says to me, "Ray's not here." Well, I panicked, totally panicked. We called the cops. So that was the only incident that we had where she wandered, and from then on, she was never alone for 2 seconds.
All of a sudden I turn around, she's not there. She got out of the car, and we were just panic. And right away I knew that she will be thinking about going home because she was in my house. And right away I called the police, and everybody in the family and the friends, everybody took a car to go look for her. And I remember the helpless feeling. I was calling her name. I call her Bobo, means grandma, loud in every houses in the neighborhood. I was afraid she was gonna walk in somebody's backyard. Somebody thinks she's an intruder and hurt her. And I remember that just totally paranoid and scared, terrified. And half an hour later, a friend of mine spotted her. It's like 4 blocks away. The El Camino Real is like 3 ways on each side, a huge intersection. Cross the street. Don't know how did she cross the street, and then go through a big parking lot, the department store, Emporium. She was just about to step into the department store. My friend spotted her. I could not imagine if she got into the department store because she doesn't speak a word of English, and she was don't know where she is. And I was just really fortunate we found her.
One of the other major changes in behavior that occurs with Alzheimer's is wandering. People take off, sometimes in search of something they think they have to do or a place they have to be that may have been from 15 years ago, and they get lost because of their disorientation. Or they may pace out of anxiety, excess energy, frustration, whatever. They can easily get hurt and exploited or lost.
If we're talking about wandering at night, that usually is because they haven't had enough energy during the daytime that's been expended. The sleep cycle sometimes gets changed in Alzheimer's patients. So hence, they sleep during the daytime, which for the caregivers, for many, is saying that's wonderful because in the morning I can get all my work done. But when somebody gets up at noontime, they may not want to go to bed till midnight. And so now you have an extra problem when you're worn out at 8 or 9 o'clock, ready to go to bed, they're still wanting to wander. So you need to readjust that sleep cycle.
One activity that may help is to get a glider rocker and get that person that's wandering or trying to get out or continually pacing to sit in a glider rocker and kind of start that repetitive movement, and that may settle them down and keep them from doing this activity. Safeguarding your house is important so that they cannot get out. In facilities that care for individuals with Alzheimer's, they will paint the doors and the door facings the same color as the wall if they want to kind of camouflage that exit. So a person who has Alzheimer's may not recognize that as a doorway through which they can exit. Other doors that are okay for them to go out are painted just a normal, regular way with the facings some contrasting color. Having a place where they can pace and wander safely is important, whether it's out in the garden or taking them to the mall and walking with them, but that they may need that activity level to some degree.
Every Alzheimer's chapter has something called a Safe Return program. It is such a wonderful program. It's basically a bracelet and name tags that can go on your clothing or on your shoelaces that has a toll-free number. And as a caregiver, I give this national location information on contacts. So if my loved one is found outside of safety, they're found away from me, whoever finds them, the police, a neighbor, can call that number and be able to get them back home to me. That program is a minimal one-time cost of under $50.
At this point in time, there are close to 15,000 people that have been enrolled in Safe Return, and we are experiencing a 99% success rate of being able to safely return families to their home when they are enrolled in Safe Return.
I heard a story about a man in Houston who was living at home, and he got out from his house, and he still had an active credit card in his wallet. And he walked outside, and he hailed down a cab. Cab stopped, and the man said, "I want to go to Atlanta and see my daughter." So the cabbie drove him to the Houston airport. He walked in. The first person he said, "I want to go to Atlanta to see my daughter." So they directed him over to the Delta counter. He went up to the Delta counter. She cut a ticket for Atlanta, charged it on his credit card. He flew all the way to Atlanta, got off the plane in Atlanta, and his daughter had died 30 years ago. There was no one in Atlanta. He had no identification in his wallet except this credit card, but he had on the Safe Return bracelet. So they called that Safe Return number, and they had him back home by the end of the day. So that's how Safe Return can work. No matter where that person is lost, they can get him back to where he belongs.
Depending again on the disease state and the progression of the disease, how far and what you would do for somebody wandering, sometimes medication is needed to help adjust in that. Behavior therapy will work for someone who has mild to moderate disease. Moderate to severe disease, behavior therapy doesn't work because they don't remember what they're supposed to do.
Along with affecting perceptions of things around us, Alzheimer's very commonly disrupts the body's internal clock. Days and nights can get mixed up. You may find that your loved one is sleepless during the night, or they may become agitated in the late afternoon or early evening. That behavior, in fact, is so common that there's a name for it. It's called sundowning. I can tell you from experience just how difficult both of these behaviors can be for a caregiver, and how much it can leave us utterly exhausted. Fortunately, there are steps you can take to make this problem less severe and ensure better rest for everyone.
He would get up in the night and he would move things around. Like at one time, at first, I was in the bedroom, and then finally he was so restless and I had moved into a different bedroom. And then sometimes if I was able to sleep and not hear him get up, sometimes I would get up in the morning and all the linen would be off the bed, folded very carefully and placed on the dresser. And maybe things from the living room might be on the kitchen counter.
I remember one time I heard noises in the bathroom when I ran out. She could not, because she had suffered many minor strokes, so her speech ability just getting worse and worse. So she could not call out for help. She fell down, and she was using this garbage can, just hitting the floor, making noise. I don't know. Maybe that's her way of trying to call some help. And since then, I don't dare to let her sleep by herself, and will put another bed next to her.
Got to a point very early on in the disease where she would be tired, she would get into bed. 2 hours later, she would be up. At the time when she could still dress herself, she would get dressed like 5 times during the night. And it would drive me nuts because I would be up the entire time, and like my spouse was much easier going than I am, and he would say, just leave her be. It doesn't really matter.
Confusion, particularly at night, sometimes called sundowning, is very common with Alzheimer's patients. Sundowning is a delirium. This is an exacerbation or worsening of the mental confusion apart from the baseline dementia that the individual has.
Problems with sleep seem to go along with this disease. Either that they want to sleep a lot and family members have trouble getting them up out of bed, or that they don't sleep well, they have difficulty going to sleep, they awaken in the middle of the night, that may be the time when they get up and wander. And if you're the caregiver, you obviously need a good night's sleep in order to keep doing this job. So sleep problems can really impact the caregiver. What we would try to do is look at the person's daily activities. Are they getting overtired, overstimulated? Is that making them more confused and more agitated in the early evening, which is generally what we call sundowning, when the person gets agitated 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. Many times that can be helped by just having them have a rest period or a quiet period in the early afternoon that lets them relax a little bit and reduce their level of stress and stimulation.
The first thing I always tell the caregiver to do is when did they eat? Or have coffee or tea or soft drinks. Any of those that have caffeine in it, you want to be able to decrease that down and not to give it after a certain time.
People with Alzheimer's disease have a lower threshold to stress and stimulation, and so you want to keep things fairly structured, fairly simple throughout the day. While we as caregivers and family members think, well, I can teach them this new game or get them involved in this new activity and have all the kids come over, that may be completely overwhelming to the individual and may actually result in some of these problem behaviors. So looking at how you structure your day, building in rest periods, having a ritual as a person gets ready for bed at night, going through the same process every single night may be boring to us, but it's reassuring to the person with Alzheimer's disease. So it may be, going to the bathroom, having something to drink, having a little snack, maybe reading a little bit or listening to music, and kind of going through that ritual that gets them settled down for the night. Again, if it's a problem that is reoccurring on and on and on again, we may need to intervene with medication. But that's usually something that we would look at as a last resort or a later step in the process.
There are many medications available. Some are very sedating, others less so, and it's a very individual treatment that's required to manage this. The caregiver needs a lot of support. Nighttime agitation is very wearing on the caregiver because that interferes with the sleep and rest that the caregiver also needs, and is often when unresolved, is often a reason to refer the individual for long-term care.
When Alzheimer's reaches the late stage, it begins attacking the part of the brain that governs physical functions. One effect of that is many Alzheimer's sufferers lose the ability to maintain continence. Even before the late stage, though, there are likely to be problems with continence, not because of physical infirmities, but because Alzheimer's causes people to forget how to manage even such seemingly simple tasks as how to find and use the bathroom.
If she was going out, whether it would be to the day program or whatever, we would try to have her go before she left, and she would resist. She would clearly resist. So we obviously got to the point where we had to use Depends, and we did that. We did a lot of laundry. I mean, I just don't think I handled it well at all. I know that when people get to that point, a lot of folks say that's really kind of the area where they can't handle. She was incontinent for years, living with us, and it was the kind of thing I got some hints from the people that took care of her during the day. I got stuff for the bed, but I really, quite frankly, didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. And I felt that if she was out and if she had an accident, then she would be horribly uncomfortable, because if she couldn't get to a place right away where you could clean her up, she would be cold, and so I felt as though I was harming her. That's really what I felt. I felt as though I was harming her. I was impeding her health, and it wasn't something that I talked about
she will go by herself and can go by herself. The only thing we've noticed in the last few months is that she's forgotten how to flush a toilet. And so we have to go in her bathroom 2 or 3 times a day and flush it for her. So far, that's the only problems we've had.
I was still hopeful that I can potty train her. So every day, regular time, I try to put her on the toilet, help, just almost like treating little baby. I run the water faucet. Hopefully she can go. But I think urinate probably is a little bit easier to control than regular bowel movement. And eventually just totally lost control.
Incontinence is an issue that usually comes in the later stages of the disease, and sometimes it's a result of some physical problems that might be going on with the person, either bladder or bowel incontinence, and sometimes it's just a matter that the person has literally forgotten to go to the bathroom. They don't recognize that there's the urge that they need to go to the bathroom. So it's really a cross between what may be either a physical issue or maybe an experience having something to do with their memory loss. However, incontinence is one of those issues that many times will be kind of the trigger point from when someone has to place someone in a long-term care facility, either an assisted living environment or a nursing home environment, because that seems to be kind of a turning point for family caregivers of when they begin to feel like they can no longer keep that person at home.
The person with dementia may not recognize the sensation of needing to urinate. They may not be able to express that they need to urinate. So often what you'll see is a change in their expression. It might be a wandering back and forth. It might be a stopping and just looking at you. There's something they need. But you'll, as a caregiver, really watch what kind of behavior they're doing when they need to go to the bathroom.
Usually, urinary incontinence starts because the individual has difficulty remembering where the bathroom is, how to get to the bathroom, how to just go about the process of toileting. Sometimes it may be as simple as putting a sign on the door that says this is the bathroom. That may help. Making a bedside toilet available to somebody, reminding them frequently that they need to go, that they should go to the bathroom.
And helping them recognize where the bathroom is. There's a lot of things about putting the word toilet or putting a picture of the toilet. The most important thing is, can they see it? So if you, instead of, in a polite society, we've been taught you keep the bathroom door shut, you don't leave the bathroom door open all the time. In your home, you want that bathroom door wide open so they can see the commode. From where they're laying in bed, you hope that they can see the commode. If not, you can get at the pharmacy a commode that will sit by the side of the bed.
Occasionally, particularly in older women, incontinence of urine may be treated medically. Many older women actually have difficulty with controlling urine flow. They tend to leak, and there are medications that can help, and the Alzheimer's patient should not go without some evaluation, and some medication could perhaps be helpful in that regard.
The person can't express that they're constipated, but you'll see an irritability that it isn't there all the time, but there will be an increased irritability, an increased anger, increased agitation, and of really watching for those signs, because the person can't tell us that they're having bowel problems.
As the disease progresses, sometimes fecal incontinence becomes a problem, and that's often much more distressing to caregivers. Again, we can look at diet, at activity level, at fluids, at medications, and kind of prompted toileting to try to eliminate some of those problems. It may not be totally fixable, but certainly we can help by helping the family member evaluate why this is happening and look at things that we can put into place.
If you have a light-colored toilet and a light-colored flooring and you're finding that they're urinating in the wrong place, you might have to change the color of the toilet seat so they actually can recognize this is the toilet, here's where it is. And the other thing is looking at how we as human beings normally use the bathroom. It's usually the first thing we do when we get up in the morning, and it's what we do immediately after eating every day. So as a caregiver, we need to be real sensitive that the person with dementia may not be able to recognize that need, and we need to take them to the bathroom and cue them to use the...
Did it on her pants. And she didn't actually realize there was something wrong, and because this is, I don't know, I just tell you that she actually used her hands to handle it and don't see that as inappropriate behavior. So when I saw her, she has handful of feces, and I really cry. I cannot expect somebody I love so much could behave that way. And I just heartbroken when I saw that. And I think it's different. My mother was worried more about how my father's gonna react, was just really hurry up and cover up, clean up, don't let your father know.
I didn't reach out a whole lot. I have to say that. I felt as though this was something. No, I could take care of it. I was very stoic in that way, probably stupidly so. But I just really didn't. I didn't reach out.
I worked with one woman who went into a janitor's closet and saw a large mop bucket and was trying to take her clothes down. And when I tried to tell her, no, this isn't a restroom, that didn't work with her reality. In her mind, this was a small, dark place that was next to the kitchen, and it was next to the kitchen, and here was a round, wet object, and in her mind, she was in a restroom. So the more you would try to say, no, you're not in a restroom, you're not doing it in the right place, the more agitated she'd become. So I just had to take my way of thinking into her way of thinking and say, you know, this isn't a very clean restroom. I know a clean one right down the hall. So she looked around and said, oh, it is dirty. And we moved to a cleaner restroom. Oh, this is one of those dirty restrooms. Let's go to a clean one. So turning everything into a positive.
For us as caregivers, maybe the hardest Alzheimer's-related behaviors to deal with are those that are socially inappropriate. Even after the first time it happens, it will seem shocking to see a loved one undressing or urinating in public or exhibiting behavior of a sexual nature. Yet all of these and others are actually fairly common, and they generally all stem from the same source as other Alzheimer's behaviors, an altered state of reality.
There are some behaviors that are particularly upsetting to family members. They're socially inappropriate behaviors or inappropriate for the setting. For example, some people will invite guests in when they're stark naked. They're not aware that they are not dressed appropriately, and it can be very embarrassing for families when someone comes down and there's company there and the patient is not dressed.
Some individuals with Alzheimer's disease become less inhibited, so they may say things or do things that they would never have done earlier in their life. These may be sexual overtures or sexual advances. They may take off their clothes in public. They may say things that would be inappropriate to say, and it's totally alien to their earlier personality. Family members can be very distraught about this, obviously, but it is the disease process that's making this happen. Again, generally with that, distraction is one of the best things that you can do, because their memory is so short that they forget kind of what they were doing and what they were involved in. Some individuals do get just really overtly disinhibited and require medication to help.
Many people with Alzheimer's disease also confuse identities between the present and the past, so that they think a daughter or a son is actually their brother or their sister because they've gone back in time. Or they may think that a daughter is the wife. And they may make sexual advances to a daughter or to some inappropriate younger person, assuming they're someone else.
So the first problem we have is someone misperceiving other folks. If I have dementia, my son might come to visit me, and I might misperceive my son as my husband and touch them inappropriately. So often it's really helping in counseling family members that this is not terrible act that the father or mother is doing. It's a total misunderstanding of who that is in front of them.
Sometimes they're not sexual advances. A lot of times when people expose themselves or playing with their genitals, it has to do with looking for a bathroom, and it's not a sexual act at all. But some people do make sexual advances to their children or to inappropriate people. And that needs to be handled very calmly. You can't preach, you can't accuse, you can't say, why would you do that to me? I'm your daughter. You know, you're just a dirty old man. None of that stuff is very helpful or effective. What you have to do is calmly remove the hand and distract. And then hope that the forgetting will work for you, that the person will forget the incident and won't feel so bad about it. Now, the family still has to deal with their own feelings about an adult acting in a non-adult or inappropriate way.
If the person with dementia moves into another setting where other people with dementia live, they may forget who their spouse is. They like their spouse is a nice person, and they enjoy the visits from their spouse, but they may find someone else who lives in the nursing home or the assisted living building and now believe that that person is their spouse. You might find them when you go visit, you might find them sitting on a couch holding hands. And that's a real difficult situation for the family. And I think for the family, the most important thing is to look at what's the most beneficial for the person I love. Trying to impose upon them, John, I'm your wife. John, don't you recognize me? John, I'm your wife, may be futile. It may be just create frustration for the person with dementia and the family. So sometimes it's better just to love them, to let them have that relationship, have that joy in life, and have them accept us in any way they can.
If you've ever been a parent to a very small child, you're already familiar with a skill that's important in dealing with behaviors that are driven by Alzheimer's. It's called redirection. As you soon discover, you can't entirely reason with someone who lives in a very different reality, but you can refocus them, redirect their behavior in a way you can manage or that doesn't cause harm.
In the very beginning, I made the age-old mistake of trying to talk logically and rationalize it. And I think I probably realized very soon that that didn't work. And I finally got to the point where I knew that as soon as she would say something, she would be on to another subject, or she would forget it.
What we found is what she would respond to, just going back to her clothes and to her jewelry. If she started to get into something, she would raise the piano. She had an old piano, and she would constantly raise it, and it was about to break the top of the lid. And so we would redirect by just, come over here, Bee Mama, look at this. So it was shiny objects that, even something that makes noise sometimes will be intriguing to her, and we would use that.
One day in the afternoon, I tried to put her down for an afternoon nap, and she all of a sudden sat up and said, I can't because my mom is downstairs. I need to go greet her. And I was shocked because my great-grandmother died when I was 4 years old. So that was like 25 years ago happened when she said that. And I was, initially, I thought she just went crazy, and I tried to argue. I was just about to tell her that your mother died 25 years ago, and I realized that's really cruel things to say, not really understanding. So right away I say, okay, don't worry about it. Why don't you take a nap? I go pour tea for her. I will go chat with her. When you wake up, we can come downstairs together to visit with her.
And one of the things you have to do is not to realize that it isn't necessary to make sense with them. My husband on one occasion was going to the store, and he asked if there was anything I wanted, and I said, well, you can pick up a couple of boxes of cat food. And I gave him the money, and I even wrote it down because he was getting forgetful, wrote it down, and he went out. And he was gone longer than usual, and I was beginning to get concerned. But he finally came back, and he looked a little agitated. And I said, Alan, are you all right? What's wrong? He said, I don't know. Something strange happened. I met an old man at the corner, and he wanted me to get some cat food. And when I came out, I couldn't find him. So I started trying to make sense. I said, oh, no, that was my cat food, Al. I asked you to get the cat food. And then he got agitated, and for a while I tried to insist, and then I finally let it alone. And later I was telling a friend about it who had a similar situation with her husband, and she said, oh, you shouldn't even try to make sense. Just tell him the man left and you didn't give him the cat food, you still got it. Well, that's a good thing, because we can use that cat food, and just go along and not try to have them make sense of something that they're not understanding.
Well, there's a lot of different techniques. You'll hear people talk a lot about the redirection or distraction. That concept is you're basically taking the person's mind off of what they're doing right now that we may not want them to be doing and refocusing them on something much more positive.
Rather than confronting them with, no, we can't do that right now, or, that you're doing something wrong or whatever, we really use that as a technique of trying to engage them in another activity that will be more comforting and more calming to them.
Oh, what you doing? What are you doing? Well, oh, me, that looks good. Who fixed that? Oh, thank you, hon. Have some of it now.
One of the behaviors that often is seen as a person going to an unsafe place, going to a door that outside of that door is not safety. So one way of approaching that, a negative way of approaching that, would be saying, John, no, don't go there. Now, if you can imagine having Alzheimer's, and just about 90% of things that you're going to do that day are going to be wrong. What it's like to be told, no, don't, you shouldn't, you mustn't, you can't, constantly, 24 hours a day. And that although that seems the most appropriate thing to do, that just has a debilitating effect on any individual. So turning how we approach it into a positive. And so if John's going to the door I don't want John to go to, I say, John, there you are. I've been looking all over for you. Come here. I've got something to show you. John, I need your help. I've got something over here I need your help with. You really need to know the person you're working with. If it's a person who wants to be helpful, you ask for their help. If it's a person who loves food, you say, oh, I've got these cookies I want you to try. But of turning it around into something much more positive.
If a person is just determined that they want the car keys and they want to go drive, and they're saying that over and over again, and they're just getting themselves worked up, and they want the keys and that they want to go drive now, you may be able to take that person and say, well, we'll go for a drive later. Let's look at this picture album. You remember, this is Sally, this is your brother John, and just get them completely into another task, redirect their activities, and try to distract them from what it is that's going to cause a problem.
My general advice to family is that distraction and reassurance works a lot better than confrontation, long explanations, pleading, coaxing, reminding, rationalizing. All that stuff never works well. Quizzing people also doesn't work well. And to diffuse a confrontation, it's better to kill people with kindness, to be overly polite, overly reassuring, and most families find that the most effective distractions are food or sweets in particular. As one woman said, there is nothing that 3 scoops of ice cream won't change.
Caregivers many times become frustrated because they can't answer the questions that the person who has the disease wants to know. And many times you don't have an answer. For example, if somebody says, I want to go home and see my mother, your answer may be, your mom's been dead for 18 years. Well, that may not have something that has the Alzheimer's type patient comprehended and can understand. Instead, redirecting that question to, what was your mother like? What type of person? Tell me something more about what you did as a child. Now, remember, Alzheimer's disease is short-term memory loss, which then can go into longer-term memory loss. depending on the stage that they're at, long-term memory may still be intact. So they may say, I remember a day that I had a picnic with my mother on the beach. And that was a very pleasant memory and a pleasant thought.
It's perfectly okay to say to somebody, you must really love your family to want to go home. Or you must really feel like, you would feel better or you would feel safer if you went home. Or I know it must be scary being here where you don't recognize people. Those validate the person's underlying feeling without saying to them, well, you can't go home anymore. Don't you know that? There's nobody there.
One woman, a caregiver, always gave her mother a Barbie doll. And she would give her mother a washcloth, and the mother would be so busy washing the Barbie doll that she would allow her to wash the private parts because she wasn't looking any longer. She was distracting her with the Barbie doll. So that's kind of the technique of distraction, is finding a positive way to take what that person's doing.
Many families also find that a distraction like offering a ride in the car, suggesting that they go out, or suggesting that they do something very simple. Like one woman found she could not leave her husband without causing major anxiety, even to go across the street for a brief period of time when he would have been perfectly safe. And she found that if she said, honey, I'm going to throw another load of laundry in, that was a familiar enough phrase that he trusted it and he didn't get upset and he didn't follow her or cling to her.
You know, Alzheimer's taught me an important lesson. Sometimes little white lies may be the only way to deal with a loved one who's living in a different reality from everyone else. I know you may find it difficult to be less than fully honest with someone you love so much. Those of us who've been caregivers can tell you that there are times when telling white lies isn't simply for our own convenience. It creates a better outcome for the person we're caring for. Though you should use them carefully, these therapeutic lies are such a time-tested strategy that experts have coined a term for them: fiblets.
I think everyone is somewhat apprehensive about being dishonest, and as I was in our family, but realizing that it's for the good of our loved one to keep them from being agitated and irritated and getting so upset. If you can prevent that by, if it means, yes, we fib or we exaggerate the truth somewhat, I found that to be favorable in terms of the outcome.
I feel it's not necessarily lying, but I thought it was okay just to give her the answer she's looking for. Tell her about it, and then she's okay, because it just need to hear a response or hear an answer. That's all she's looking for.
He would ask about family members sometimes who are deceased, and why hasn't my sister been over here lately? And you don't say, well, honey, she's been dead 2 years. You say, well, we'll have to check with her. I'll do that. I'll make a call and see. And then he seems perfectly satisfied with that.
So it's a complete distortion of reality that the caregiver has to try to put themselves into wherever that individual is now and meet them there. One of the difficult things is sometimes in order to do that, you can't be 100% truthful. You have to tell little white lies, or I've heard someone call them fiblets. You have to kind of buy into that reality.
I don't think that that's being dishonest with someone. It's really a way that what we're trying to do is to manage whatever difficult situation we have at the time, or perhaps protecting the person from a piece of information that may be difficult for them.
If the person is at a stage where they truly will understand that you're lying to them, you certainly aren't going to use that technique in any way. The use of a fiblet is when you know that the outcome for this person is going to be better than the reality of the truth.
The important thing to remember is that if you don't do that, if you try to logically explain to this person why you're not their mother, and that his mother's been dead many years and you're now 85 years old, and you're going to increase their stress level, you're going to cause them to become more agitated, you're going to cause them distress, and that's only going to aggravate the whole situation. So it's perfectly appropriate to kind of buy into their reality and help them feel safe and help them feel comfortable in that reality.
And she goes, I am upset. My son, I don't know where my son is. So we tried to distract her, which is getting her involved in other tasks. We tried to talk with her about other things. We tried to reason with her. Well, I'm sure your son's all right. Nothing would calm her down. By about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, her son changed to her husband. She was no longer looking for her son. It was her husband. I must find my husband. I must find he's the doctor. You know where the doctor is. And her agitation was increasing. Nothing we could do short of trying to get a medication would have changed her. So I said, well, he's not here right now. Would you like to call him? So we went in the office, and I gave one of the caregivers, one of the nurse aides, a cell phone. And I said, go back in there and you be the nurse when I call. So we looked up her husband's phone number in the phone book. Of course, the phone number wasn't there, but we looked it up, and I called, and I asked to speak to the doctor. And she said to me, she said, who's that on the phone with you? I said, it's the doctor's nurse. It's your husband's nurse. She said, let me speak to her. So she took the phone, asked for her name, and when she asked where her husband was, the nurse aide said, he's with a patient right now. And she said, oh, yes, of course, he's with a patient right now, yes. Well, could you take a message from my husband? Could you please take a message? And the nurse aide said, yes, I'll take a message. And she said, would you tell my husband that I called and I love him very much and I miss him? And tell him again, I love him very much. And so when she hung up the phone, she calmed down, and that's all she had to do. Her husband had been dead for over 40 years, but she had to say that message. She had to get that word, that one little bubble of who she was, out to him.
Learning how to recognize and understand our loved one's Alzheimer's-related behavior is an important step, but it's only one of the first. The next, even bigger step involves learning how to address that behavior in a way that reflects our loved one's own sense of reality. When we take that step, we've gone a long way toward having a more manageable daily life. And that's the subject of the next program in this series.